All right. Well, happy Veterans Day to everyone who is watching, or Remembrance Day if you are outside of the United States. And really excited for the chat that we are going to be having this evening. So last year, about this time, October of last year, I was in Guadalcanal with Dave Holland. And one of the individuals, one of the historians who was with us on that trip was Phil Bradley. Phil Bradley has done a lot of work talking about, writing books on New Guinea. As a matter of fact, we had him on here on a previous chat talking about this book right here, D-Day New Guinea. I think at the end of the year, I'm going to do like a whole book review of books that I've read in 2025. This was one of the first ones that I read this year, and it was one of my favorites. Just an outstanding read, and learned a lot. But anyway, while we were in Guadalcanal, we were sitting at dinner one night, and I asked Phil what his next project was, and he was neck deep in this epic project to cover the history of the Australians in the First World War, which I was really excited about when I went and did the Arras series. I had a chance to go to Bullecourt and see at least one of the battlefields of the Australians. So anyway, I think we've already got some people who are pretty excited about this. We're going to go ahead and bring Phil in. Phil, good to see you again, man.
Yeah, you too, JD. It's been too long, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. So today is Veterans Day in the United States, and I know that right now it's tomorrow in Australia. So I think things are a little bit different in the United States than maybe the rest of the world as far as how we commemorate November 11th. So we have like a Veterans Day. And in my opinion, there's a little bit less focus on the armistice and the First World War. What does Armistice Day or Remembrance Day kind of look like in Australia?
It's interesting in Australia because we have another day where we commemorate the dead from our wars, which is Anzac Day, which is 25th of April every year. So we have 2 days, if you like. So, but certainly, what we used to call Armistice Day and is now called Remembrance Day is certainly another day which is filled with solemnity and a lot of wreath laying, that type of thing. Certainly in Canberra, and it's a very respectful day, but I don't think it's as big as Anzac Day is in Australia. No.
Okay, interesting. Well, yeah, let's go ahead and jump right in. So last week in Australia was the release of your new book, Inferno, Australians on the Western Front. I don't think it's out in the United States yet, to my knowledge. I did some checking on Amazon, but it's definitely out in Australia and is going to be coming out in the United States. This seems like an ambitious project because it's not focusing in on one battle or one unit or anything like that. Like this is a pretty comprehensive endeavor that you've taken on here.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, so it's initially my initial proposal to the publisher was actually to focus on one sector of that war. So that was the time from the start of 1917 through to May 1917. So that encompassed those 2 battles at Bullecourt, which you covered in your Arras series. It also covered the end of the Somme battle and the mud and the retreat of the Germans to the Hindenburg line at the time. So it was a really interesting period. And the reason I'd only concentrated on 5 months is because there was just so much material and detail that you can get into. There was so much material, particularly soldiers writing their diaries and letters from the First World War. So that was my proposal. But talking with the publisher, they said, we want to do, if you're going to do it, do the whole Western Front. So I'd already done 2 other World War I books with them, one on Gallipoli, the earlier battles, and then one on the fighting in the Middle East with the Light Horsemen. So this was like the finish of the trilogy. So, but it's a project, as I say, I'd been interested in it since first time I went to the Western Front was 1981, a long time ago now. So it's always been in the back of my mind. Because I got a job up in New Guinea in the 90s, I sort of went off on another tangent and did a lot of World War II stuff at the time, particularly because the veterans were still alive at that time from World War II.
Yeah.
So now I've come back to World War I, and the challenge was to do the whole of the Western Front was like 4 times the amount of work I'd planned for. And I just had to focus. So I decided to focus on the men's stories. So it's their letters, their diaries, and there were so many of them. And what came to fall is how the book was written. So there was a lot of information on some battles, less on others. But all the battles, the main battles that the Australians took part in, are covered. They're not covered in great detail, the tactics and the strategies and this type of thing. It's basically down to what the men experienced in those battles through their diaries, their letters, and some interviews and such. I actually interviewed a couple of World War I veterans back in the 90s, so they're in there as well. But mainly it was like, as I say, these 500 odd diaries. And I mean, World War I has a big impact in Australia, a huge impact at the time, because for the size of our population, we sent 5 divisions to the Western Front, plus ancillary units. So there was something like, got the figures here. Yeah, over 295,000 Australians served on the Western Front.
And to my knowledge, to my knowledge, the Australians were kind of viewed similar to the Canadians as like these tough, hardy, kind of wild men from afar who were coming over and were kind of treated as almost like shock troops for the British Army. Is that correct?
Well, it's interesting. Actually, most of them came from the cities. There were obviously country people amongst them. But you've got to remember they arrived on the Western Front in mid-1916. So around March 1916, and then the first battles they fought in was July 1916. So as of that period, the British and French armies had been fighting for 2 years on the Western Front. So their forces, the cream of their forces had been destroyed in those 2 years. So they were rebuilding their armies as well. I mean, the British had completely rebuilt their army, what they call the New Kitchener's Army. And then on 1st of July 1916, when they went into action on the Somme, they suffered horrendous losses. So when the Australians came in, and there was a New Zealand division as well, and as I say, the Canadians were also there, they made quite a, they took over some of the key roles in those battles, as you say, as shock troops to a degree. And but like any troops, they developed as the war went on as well. They got better. And they also got weaker in many ways. So just as I say, because then they lost the cream of their men as well. And they'd also lost a lot of men at Gallipoli. So Australian Army that went to Gallipoli, there were 2 divisions sent there. And then they expanded the army from 2 divisions to 5 divisions, increased the artillery massively in those units as well before they were sent to France.
Interesting. All right. Well, yeah. Hey, let's jump right in here.
Okay.
Yeah. So tell me where we are here.
Okay, so this is a map of the Western Front. You can see on the left-hand side the line in 1914, which was essentially the line that the Australians would fight along in 1916, 1917. You can see the line in 1918, which is the dotted line further to the right. That was a result of the 1918 offensives. So we'll just stick with that black line as where most of the battles are going to be fought by the Australians on the Western Front. And if you look right in the centre of the map, you just stay on the map for a while. Look right in the centre of the map, you'll see the Somme River. So the Somme River runs to the sea, approximately from east to west, through the major towns of Péronne and Amiens. And these would become pivotal areas where the Australians would fight. So this was when they called the battles on the Somme. These were the battles around Albert. You can see there, Bapaume and Bullecourt Arras further north. These are the areas where the Australians would fight most of the war. And then, as we'll see later in the war, they moved in mid-1917, they moved up into Belgium. So they moved the units up into Belgium, and then they fought around Ypres and Messines, which were the two major battles up in the north of France. And then they were brought back again for the 1918 offensives, which would also take place around the Somme battlefield. So that's essentially what we'll talk through. We're just going to go through some photos, and I'll just give some brief description of the battles, and we'll go from there.
Sure.
So here we can see some Australians. These Australians from the 2nd Division moving up to the line on the Somme. They actually came across, they trained in Egypt, other than one division, the 3rd Division, which was training in England and wouldn't join the fray until Belgium. But these troops have landed in the south of France at Marseille on the Mediterranean. So they've come across from Egypt and then set north in early 1916. And by the middle of 1916, they're ready for the first to be used for the first time, and they'll be used in the Somme offensive or diversionary operations related to that. So, as I say, the Australian troops are just kitted out pretty much the same as the British troops. Use the same equipment. The main distinguishing feature for the Australians is the slouch hat. You'll see a man in the middle there with his slouch hat on. But obviously, when they went in the front lines, they'd be wearing helmets for protection. Go to the next slide. And so the first battles that the Australians took part in, the first battle was actually a diversionary battle called Fromelles, which took place on the 19th of July 1916 up in the north of France. And it was an attack as a diversionary attack. And the north of France, the Flanders area, is very flat. So the 5th Division, which took part, suffered very heavily without much gain. And so therefore, that particular attack wasn't so successful. But at Pozières, which is the first division and the 2nd Division took part in early over the next few days, they took this heavy ground, which had been fought over very strongly. So very much an artillery. So you can see the ground there around Pozières absolutely churned up by artillery. So these battles would be, as you can see on the front cover of the book, there's an artillery piece, and it's called Inferno because these battles were like going into an inferno. With the artillery particularly, causing massive casualties amongst the troops.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look at, when they think of World War I, they think of poison gas and they think of machine guns. Man, artillery was the big killer in the First World War.
Yeah, machine guns as well, of course, because, when you're attacking across lines, what they call hopping the bags, going over the top, whatever it may be, you basically, unless the artillery has wiped out the enemy positions, the Germans were pretty clever. They would shelter in deep dugouts, and then they would come up with their machine guns and just man their positions and wipe out that attack. They developed tactics later in the war where they would have what they called creeping barrages, where the troops would move behind them. But at this stage of the war, they were just relying on these massive barrages. But this had proved that it wasn't quite going to work. Yeah. So this is a diorama. So the Australian War Memorial particularly uses dioramas to show what the battlefield was like, because no photo can do it justice in terms of what was happening. So this is a diorama of the battlefield at Pozières, and this is a position called the windmill. Now, in the area around the windmill, there are probably more Australian lives fell than in any other area of the battlefields. And this is a position held by basically a section of men from the 48th Battalion, and it's the top point of the windmill. So this is only a very slight rise, but it allows observation over the German position. So the Australians held this position. It's just a shell hole, just holding out in a crater. You can see 4 men there holding out, and then dead men around them. And this is very much what it was like fighting at Pozières. So you couldn't have a straight line of a defence line. You just had outposts in these craters just trying to survive and maintain observation while artillery went on all around them to try to hold off any German attacks.
Do you know why it was called the windmill?
Yeah, because there was a windmill there prior to war, because it was a slight rise in the ground. It's just to the east of Pozières. So the Pozières escarpment was fought over, and they just managed to get into the final German lines. And from this position, they could actually see what they call the green fields beyond. They could see out towards along the Bapaume Road, out past Courcelette, and actually see that there was something, that they were gaining ground, even though it was a great cost and only in small increments. Pozières was a success for the Australians, but really heavy losses took place there.
Okay, and quick question here, asking what the weather in this battle was like. So this isn't the torrential rains and mud and
no, it's not. It's not. No, so this is in July, August 1916. The weather's not too bad, but because the ground is getting so churned up by the artillery, as soon as there's any rain, it just turns to mud. So it was very difficult to advance, to get anywhere along what were shattered trenches and that type of thing. So when the weather did turn, it made it very difficult, and particularly to move up to the front line, or to move supplies up to the front line, or to come out of the front line, it was total drudgery. It would take hours to cover just a couple of 100 meters because of the muddy conditions in the trenches, what there were left of them. And that's the position. It's been preserved. It's got this was taken some years ago before they put some monuments on it and everything else. But that's the base of the old windmill. So it's pretty much the same position that we saw in the diorama, and it's been preserved as an Australian battlefield. Just a small area, just east of Pozières on the road to Bapaume. Yeah. Today it's all sorts of memorials around there, but I took that some years ago before that was all done.
Yeah, and I haven't been here personally, but I've been up in that area around Ross and everything. And what's striking when you see this picture here is just how flat and open it is. So if you have to go and attack the enemy trench, like there's nothing to hide behind. There's nothing. It is just wide open country.
But here you can see it's just slightly higher than the surrounding countryside. So it was like a mound. So it became like a really critical position, just this little mound. And you'll see the same in Belgium, places, you call a place a ridge in Belgium, and it's like just a little slope, a little lift in the ground. So, but that's what they're fighting over. Absolutely. This is a German photograph from a German medic on the Somme, a guy called Walter Kleinfeld. Got this off the net, but it also shows the Germans were also suffering greatly from the battles, and these are some German medics looking after wounded men somewhere on the Somme. Okay, this is near Pozières. This is a place called Moquet Farm. So Moquet Farm was a really critical position and wouldn't fall until the Canadians took it in September, but it had been fought over since the 1st of July. So it's just east of Thiepval. So Thiepval is where the big British memorial arch is today. Yes. So the British had fought over this area, the Australians, and then the Canadians before it fell. So all it was this simple farm, but underneath was totally honeycombed with underground cellars and defense positions and tunnels coming out everywhere else. And you can see the trench lines around it on the left. So that was taken before the bombardment at the battle. The picture on the right is exactly the same location. And you can see it's totally obliterated. So even they're fighting for this location, you can't even find the location. But what it is, it's just it's on one of these slight rises just north of that previous area we looked at, the windmill. And again, the number of Australians were killed in this area as well. Some of their bodies have still not been recovered, and they're listed on that, as I say, on that Thiepval memorial for the British. Yeah.
Wow. And
so that's Moquet Farm today. So you can see the road. The farm today is on the right-hand side of the road, just beyond those yellow fields. And the original farm was on the left, underneath those trees on the left. So that's the position today. Been there a few times, and I've met the farmer there, and he's just got a backyard in his farm, just full of shells and bits of wire and all sorts of stuff. The amount of shells dropped on that one small area. They're still digging up shells today, as you probably know from your experience there.
Yeah,
you see them on the corners of the road still, unexploded shells. It's still quite a dangerous area. But yeah, that's at Moke Farm.
I heard an estimate. It's been a little while back, and I may be wrong on my number here, but I think that the estimate was that it's going to take upwards of 700 years before all of the unexploded ordnance and detritus from World War I will be cleared out.
It'll probably never get cleared out because it's just. I mean, for example, the French at Verdun. Now, you went to Verdun. You know what that's about. Okay, so what they did at Verdun is they just planted forests over the battlefield. The battlefield was not cleared at all, and even today, very dangerous to go into the woods around Verdun. And so that's one approach. But here you have farmers, farmers who have farmed here for centuries, and they want to keep farming. So these and every year they'll haul up more unexploded bombs, and occasionally one will go off or gas will seep from one, and there'll be injuries or deaths. It's a legacy of these battles. There's French and Belgian engineer units who are employed full time on this duty, and some of those will also die doing that duty. But the First World War didn't end with the end of the First World War, and 110 odd years later, it's still going on. The legacy of it. This is basically a propaganda photo taken of Australians who have come out of the line at Pozières, showing them all happy and lifting their helmets. But I can assure you that there were a lot of, things weren't so happy, if you like, among the troops. They still had good morale, but as I say, the Australians had a good attitude for most of the war. But later in the war, they'd sort of come to realise it's just going on. And you've got to remember too, all Australians who served on the Western Front were volunteers. Twice the Australian tried to bring in conscription to conscript soldiers, and twice that was defeated in referendums in Australia. So it needs to be remembered, as I say, they were all volunteers. Even though they came under British law, they did not, where the British Army had a death penalty for desertion and things like that, that did not apply to the Australians. So they, because they were volunteers, that was the reason.
Yeah, man, I love this photo though. That's a neat photo. I've never seen that one before.
And you can see the guys all, how they were equipped with their leggings, their bulky battle dress, if you like, where they could carry grenades in their pockets and things like that. As I say, they were equipped with the standard British helmet, standard Lee Enfield rifle, same as in the British Army. They would use Lewis guns, Lewis light machine guns, and they would use them more and more as the war went on as a very effective weapon, semi-automatic weapon on the battlefield as well. And of course, they use the same artillery systems as the British used. And so we go to the next phase of the battle. So we go through the winter after the Somme, and then the Germans are realizing that they need to. So their front line, which extended out along the front of the Somme, they realized they could cut that back by putting a new line in, sort of cutting a cord further back. They could save quite a number of divisions and shorten their line. And so that's what they did. They pulled back in March 1917. They pulled back to a new line, which was called the Hindenburg line. And so when the attacks went in at Arras and this supporting Australian attack at Bullecourt, just south of Arras, this is they were attacking these German positions known as the Hindenburg line. And here you can see another of the dioramas from the Australian War Memorial. You can see this attack took place on the 6th of April 1917. And you can see there that the ground is actually snow covered. So it was very cold still then. They had support of tanks, but unfortunately not great support of artillery because they hadn't moved the artillery forward yet to these new positions. So the the attack failed, despite the Australians getting into the German trenches and holding them for a time after that attack would ultimately fail.
And if people want a point of reference on this battle that you might be familiar with, the movie 1917 is set during this action or the lead up to it. Yeah,
in this in the Arras battles and around just north of Bullecourt. That's correct.
I was getting ready to say it's where that movie takes place. Like Acoust is a real place, and it's really, really close to Bullecourt. Yeah, just north of where.
Acoust is just north of Bullecourt. That's correct. I mean, obviously they used a bit of license in the film, but it's very accurate in terms of the Germans had pulled back to new lines. So when they attack these lines, you can see the open trenches. There's still green grass, which wouldn't last. Wouldn't last once the battles got underway. But there are actually two battles at Bullecourt. So they attacked in April, and then they went at it again in May with a much stronger attack, which held the lines longer. I mean, the reason they're attacking here is because the British attack at Arras had initially also been quite successful, and they thought if they attacked here, they would just put so much pressure on the Germans from two angles. They could actually join together and cut off part of the German front, force them to withdraw from the new lines. But they were unable to get the two pincers to match up, if you like. So the attack ultimately just lost a lot of men. Obviously, the Germans also lost a lot of men, but it would really, in the end, suck in most of the Australian division. It would suck in 4 of the 5 Australian divisions, and they would have to be rebuilt. That's after these battles, they were sent up to Belgium.
Yeah, Bullecourt also has one of my favorite museums there in that Arras area. Help me with the name. I can't remember it off the top of my head.
Jean Latte.
Jean Latte. Yeah. And
so
you knew him, didn't you?
Yeah. I knew him very well. So I used to go and visit him at Bullecourt when he lived in that little farm before it turned in. He just had like a big collection in his garage in the farm yard. So he'd let me wander around and look at everything. We'd go out to the battlefield together, pick up shells and grenades and things, and he'd show me around, and then we'd share a wine together. And he was the guy who actually convinced me I should write a book about the Battle of Bullecourt.
Oh, really?
Which sort of started this project. So this is back in the 90s. He and another French guy called Andre Coyot. So Andre lived in Arras, just south of Arras, a place called Beaurain, a suburb of Arras. Okay. And those guys, this is back in the 90s. I mean, Andre had a holiday house out in the country. He let me stay in his holiday house for a week while I explored the battlefields. I'd go and see him every morning, and he'd say, "Philip, today I'm going to send you out to this place. There's a man there who's going to show you his collection in his farmhouse." And then he'd say, "Another day, we're going to go down these tunnels, which aren't normally open, but I've arranged for you to go down them today." And so we'd go into these tunnels out east of Arras around a place called Roux, which is amazing. It was just these underground like cities. So I got a great experience from these French guys who were, and this is back in the 90s before it became that popular to go to the Western Front. Now there's, as you say, the Jean Latte Memorial Museum, Jean and Jean Latte, his wife as well. That is, there it is there. So they've brought all that stuff into the museum now, and it's a really good museum, well worth going to. That's in the old part of the original farmhouse.
Yeah, it has such an amazing collection. Yeah, so what we were looking at here is just some footage from episode 390 of History Traveler, where I go and talk about the Battle of Bullecourt. I hope that you've never watched that episode, because I would be embarrassed, because I probably didn't do it justice.
No, I've watched it. It was a good episode. Anything to spread the word, mate.
Yeah, thanks. But I mean, you can see here the volume of metal that man extracted from the battlefield is.
Oh man, he was pulling up bits of tanks. He had like a reconstructed tank in there and all sorts of stuff. Some of that's now in the Australian War Memorial, actually, parts of those tanks.
Oh, really?
Yeah, the story of the tanks in those battles is really interesting. So they're manned by a British unit, and they tried to support the Australians, but they were only using early tanks, and machine gun bullets, heavy machine gun bullets, would go through the side of the tank. So the tanks didn't last as long as perhaps they should have. But Yeah, interesting story. That's what they call a toffee apple or plum pudding mortar, which is big, like a big mine on the end of a mortar. They're different types of grenades. Look like French grenades actually. Grenades in this battle were really effective, and the men soon ran out of them. But trench warfare, you really needed grenades. They're German grenades, of course. Weapons are developed. Weapons are developed for the circumstance. They're rifle grenades. They're really, really interesting because you could put one of those and it looks like it's a spigot on it. So you put that down the rifle barrel, and they would fire out to a longer distance than you could throw a grenade. So if you had some of those in your unit, you could hold off with German defenders who were coming at you just trying to throw grenades. You had rifle grenades, you could fire them further, so you had an advantage. So again, a weapon developed during the First World War due to the circumstances.
Yeah. All right. All right, so let's go ahead and go to the next one here.
So I like this one. This is a Lewis gunner section, painting of a Lewis gunner section. So you can see there. So these were a really effective weapon on the battlefield. If you can set up Lewis gun sections, it's basically a light machine gun with a round magazine on top. They're actually US design, US Canadian design, and so there you can see an Australian Lewis gun section trying to stay very low in a crater. One man would service the gun and and one man would fire the gun, and one man would carry the magazines to put on the top of it. And it's particularly, I like that photo because there was a man at Bullecourt who I really like. He wrote extensive diaries. A guy called George Mitchell. And George Mitchell was a private at Bullecourt. So he went forward with his Lewis gun, and he fired it like this guy is, just holding off the Germans until they got overwhelmed. And then he retreated. And his battalion commander, watched this man come back just with his Lewis gun over his shoulder, as if he's going for a stroll. He said at the time, he said he was so exhausted that he couldn't run, but he came out with his machine gun, and the battalion commander called for him immediately and promoted him to lieutenant on the spot. So Lieutenant George Mitchell then went on to serve throughout the war. He was awarded various awards for his bravery.
Wow.
And later in the war, he would have a critical role in holding up the German counterattack on the old Somme battlefield when the Germans counterattacked in March 1918. He was at the head of his unit at that time, fighting off the Germans again.
Interesting.
Oh, and that's at Bullecourt. So that's just on the battlefield. So this is the sort of shells pulled up all the time. You can see lower left those sort of cylindrical shells with the spigot on the end. So they're trench mortar shells, Australian, what they call Stokes mortar. So they're also very effective. So that was an early form of like trench mortar. And then in the background, obviously, heavier shells. And these are just the ones that didn't go off, or some of them. So you can just imagine the amount of ordnance that was thrown down into that battle.
Yeah. Let me throw another question at you here. When looking at photos, how are Australian soldiers identified? Their uniforms look so similar to the British. So is there anything that if you're looking at just any random photo, is there anything that you can look for that distinguishes a British soldier from a New Zealand soldier from an Australian soldier?
Not really. Not when they've got their helmets on. The only thing would be their shoulder tags. So the Australians wore the Rising Sun badge on their shoulder, which is a distinctive badge that identified them, plus their divisional badges. But otherwise, no, they're the same. Pretty much look the same as a British soldier.
Yeah, and also the slouch hat. I guess in some of them,
slouch hat out of the line, they could wear the slouch hat, but in the line they'd be wearing a helmet.
Right.
Without question. So now we're going to move up. So as I said, at the end of those failed attacks at Bullecourt, the Australian Corps moved up to Belgium. And so the first battle they would take part in Belgium, and this would be the first battle the 3rd Australian Division would take part in. They'd been training in England, so they'd come across from England, and they would fight this battle at Messines. So the Messines battle took place in June 1917, and it was distinguished by this massive mine bombard. They let off like 19 mines before the attack, and this is the remains of one of them on the battlefield. You can just see the size of that mine crater. So It's basically, it's huge. So letting these off under the German positions, obviously they all went off around the same time in the early morning, and then the attack came straight after that. So that was a very successful attack, and it took Messines Ridge just south of Ypres, and that gave the Australians and the British a dominant position to view the German lines. And then it was the first phase of what would become the Ypres, what they call the Third Ypres Offensive, which would then start the following month with the British forces, and then the Australian forces would become very much involved in September 1917 in those attacks as well, and would draw in all the Australian units into those battles.
Wasn't there an incident not too long ago along the Messines Ridge where like there's still some unexploded mines that are beneath the surface that didn't go off? Wasn't there like a lightning strike that kicked one of them off and blew it up?
Yeah, it was back in the 50s. So,
okay. I thought it was more recent than that.
No, it was about 3 or 4 that hadn't gone off, and for whatever reason, and I think it was the 1950s, one of them went off from a lightning strike. That's correct. Crazy, huh? But yeah, there's still a lot of explosive underneath that area, in different parts. These are Australian troops at Ypres waiting to jump over a place called West Hoyt Ridge. So this would be the Australian role in this upcoming battle, which was also called the Battle of Menin Road, because it took part along the Menin Road. So the idea of it was to take a succession of small ridges, culminating in the final ridge, which was the ridge upon which Passchendaele lay. And by taking those ridges, you would deny the Germans observation into Ypres, and then you could also observe their rear areas. So again, these were only really small ridges, but they were dominant because you could see from them into the Allied lines. So, and this battle had been going on since July. So the Australians came in at the end of September, and they made an impact with the British alongside them. They took a series of ridges. They took West Hoyt Ridge, Anzac Ridge, Polygon Wood, and then pushed on to what's called Broodseinde Ridge. And Broodseinde Ridge is the ridge extending further north up towards Passchendaele, but they didn't get into Passchendaele at that time. The Canadians got in there later in November. Sorry. Okay. Yeah, so you can see there the Australian troops looking pretty relaxed in those positions, but it would be a brutal and horrible battle, fought in the mud basically as time went on.
All right,
go to the next slide. So there you can see this is taken along the Menin Road. So these are wounded that have just come out. You can see on the right a wounded man being carried by some stretcher bearers, and on the front, a couple of German POWs been roped into carrying them as well. So that force is moving back. They're moving back towards Ypres, which is the town in the distance, back along the Menin Road. But you can just see there the difficulties of that this represented. And of course, there's shells dropping all the time in these areas. The Germans are firing. As I say, they have observation posts up on the ridge, so they can see these rear areas and fire on them. So it was a really, really difficult place to fight for everybody, including the artillery. They also came under fire. So at this stage, also the Germans were using bombers. So they would bomb the lines at night as well if they saw any lights. So there's all sorts of things going on. Well, all this is well covered in the book. A lot of experiences the men at Ypres were quite extraordinary.
Yeah.
And that's one of the famous photographs by Frank Hurley, who was the Australian official photographer there. And these are troops moving back from the front moving back towards Ypres through what's called Chateau Wood. So the wood's all been burned away, as you can see. And they're moving.
I was getting ready to say, calling it a wood is pretty generous.
Yeah. Well, you can see that the wood is it was a wood, but there's no the trees are still there, but just shattered like matchsticks.
So these are Australian troops that we're looking at.
Yeah, I think so. They're Australian troops moving back just from the front line, but they had to create these duckboard track. So if you got off that track, you could sink, you could die, you could drown in that mud and water. So really difficult place to fight.
Wow. As many times as I've seen this picture, I never knew that was Australian troops that were coming back off the line.
I've got they are actually named somewhere, and I'm pretty sure they're Australian troops moving back. They're just a group of 4 of them. Yeah. And there you can see that's another Hurley photograph. It's actually taken in color. So in the book, I've actually got a section of color photographs, including some modern ones. So that was done at the time. That's one of the German pillboxes or bunkers. So because it was so difficult to dig in on that front, it was just so muddy and sloppy. The Germans created these above ground bunker positions, and they held those, and they were sort of spread out across the battlefield. And so they had to be captured for the attack to move forward. And that's probably one that was in Polygon Wood, and here's one today still standing in Polygon Wood, which is one of the main battlefields there as they're moving up between the ridges up towards Brugesheim Ridge. There's a big Australian cemetery there as well, a big British and Australian cemetery. And this is inside one of the German underground positions that was opened up. This is taken some years ago when they found this German bunker under. It was actually at the brickworks at Zonnebeck, which is nearby, and it's all closed up now. But at the time, you're able to get inside, so you can see where the Germans would sleep along the right-hand side there, and they would shelter, and you would enter and get out by these wooden ladders that came up to the surface. So I thought that was interesting to know that, like, there was an underground war going on at the same time as there was an above-ground war, and the Australians were heavily involved in that as well. Famous Australian movie called Beneath Hill 60, which deals with that sort of aspect of the war and the mining and everything else. So there was a war below, there was a war on the ground, obviously. Then there's also a war in the air, and that's also covered in the book with a number of accounts. Charles Bean, who was I use his notes pretty extensively in the book, and particularly his diaries where he describes his own experiences. But he interviewed an Australian pilot who was flying in a British squadron over Ypres. And what they had to do, they actually had to fly beneath the artillery shells. So the artillery shells above them were like a dome, and then they'd fly around beneath that, observing and strafing the enemy positions. But to enter that dome and to get out of it, they just had to hope that a shell didn't hit their plane on the way in or out. But you can imagine
and this is all closed off today.
Yeah, this is closed off today. Yeah, but as I say, with the planes, it was also difficult. It was difficult below ground, above ground, and in the air.
Yeah, man, oh man. All right, I'm gonna go ahead and advance on to the next slide here.
Okay, so after the fighting at Passchendaele, up to Passchendaele, then the Australians were then pulled out into reserve, and then in March 1918, the Germans made their big counterattack and pushed the Australians right back to pushed the English and French armies right back to where they'd started like a year before, back and threatened Amiens, which was a key position on the Somme, which was a big base for the armies there. And the Australians were sent down to try to hold the line in these areas. British troops as well, some French troops as well in the south. So they held, but the Australians had to hold this sector in front of Amiens, which is a really critical position. So this shows these Australian troops from 48th Battalion fighting off. You can just see in the distance the Germans advancing over that railway embankment at Dernancourt and through the tunnel, and they're advancing on the Australians. And the Australians managed to hold them in these positions just near Albert in the Dernancourt area. So really, again, another diorama from the Australian War Memorial, which shows something that there was no photographers working at the time in that area, so they used dioramas to represent that.
Nice. And I just saw that Rob from the channel History in Your Hand has entered the chat. And Rob, I hope that you see some of this. He lives over in England, and I hope that he sees some of this and
Right.
it inspires him to go hit some Australian sites.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, as I say, many of the sites, the Australians and British fought alongside each other, and particularly in that retreat, the British pulled back and the Australians helped them hold those lines. This is an incident, the famous Baron von Richthofen, you may have heard of, the high-scoring German ace of World War One, used to fly around in a red. You'd call his unit the Flying Circus because they all painted their planes in colours, so they were obvious. And he had a red triplane, red Fokker triplane, and this plane was actually shot down over the Australian lines in April 1918. And this is a diorama of the plane having come down, and the Australian troops getting right in there, souveniring whatever they could off it in typical Australian fashion, and. It's quite likely the plane was actually shot down by Australian machine gunners, and that's dealt with in my book as well. But this diorama is at Peter Jackson's museum over in New Zealand, where he's got a great collection of World War One aircraft.
I would love to go see that.
This diorama is outstanding because I remember going to this museum and seeing these amazing aircraft, and they're all in diorama. It's like they're in action. And so Peter Jackson, of course, well known for his cinematography. And so then right in the center of the museum is this scene showing the death of the Red Baron and how he's Australians are souveniring the plane. Sort of a wonderful way to represent that. Yeah.
The way that we remember and commemorate the Red Baron over here is on an oven pizza box. Did you all have Red Baron pizza over there?
No, but I remember as a kid the Snoopy song.
Oh yeah,
Snoopy and the Red Baron. So he was
we have a brand of pizza called Red Baron Pizza, and it has his picture on the front.
Man, we'll next time I'm over, Jay. The next time we go out for dinner, we'll try that one. Okay.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay, so so the German counteroffensive was stopped, but it now meant the front lines were actually once again in this open territory around the Somme. So here you've got men digging in on the chalklands around the Somme. These are Australians and American troops. So the Americans had entered the war, as you know, in 1917, and by July 1918 they were certainly in action, and some units had been attached to Australian units to learn how to fight, so to speak, learn how to fight in these conditions. And so just before the battle for Hamel, which took place on 4th of July 1918, which is an auspicious day in American. 4th of July is obviously an auspicious day for the Americans. So some of the American troops took part in this action with the Australians, despite being ordered by the American commander, not Pershing, not to do so. He wanted them to fight under American command, but some of them fought in this battle. And there you can see a number of troops, and some of those guys are American in that photo at Hamel. That was a victory for Australians, just a small battle, but it was the first battle for General Monash, who was now in command of the Australian Corps. The Australian Corps had previously been commanded by, or what they call the Anzac Corps, included the New Zealand division as well. The Anzac Corps had been commanded by General Birdwood, who was a British soldier. That had been since Gallipoli. But in 1918, in mid-1918, his position had been taken over by General Monash, an Australian general, and he would lead the Australian Corps, the Anzac Corps, then at the battles. Firstly, the smaller battle at Hamel, but then the big battle, which would break the German line on 8th of August, 1918.
Interesting. All right.
So here's a photo taken of that battle in August 1918. So 8th of August 1918 was the big, what the Germans called the catastrophe, the catastrophe. So this was an attack where all the ideas that the British Army and the French Army had developed over this time, and particularly John Monash was an engineer. He was very good at implementing things like counter battery fire. So every German artillery battery was spotted. And when the attack started on the 8th of August, they knocked all those batteries out. So then the troops could advance without coming under heavy artillery fire. and of course they used tanks as well. So you can see in the background one of the tanks used in that battle. They also used supply tanks to bring supplies forward. They had aircraft, air superiority as well. So a lot of the things that we associate with modern combined arms warfare were present in this battle. And the Australians and Canadians had their corps had the key role of breaking open this German defence east of Amiens. And then the British corps on the left of the Australians would advance, and the French corps on the right of the Canadians also advanced at this time. And this broke open the German defence and pretty much led to the end of the war 3 months later. And here you can see one of the key battles that the Australians fought at this time. And at this time also, this is all the Australian units are getting weaker and weaker because the reinforcements are just not arriving. And so see Louise there talking about Hangard Wood. So Hangard Wood was just south of Villers-Bretonneux, and Villers-Bretonneux was basically the front line for these attacks, which where the Germans had been stopped in March, April 1918, and it's where the attack took place in August 1918. So these troops here are shown, the 24th Battalion troops shown just below Mons-Saint-Quentin, and Mons-Saint-Quentin was one of the key German positions. It was like a mountain. When I say a mountain, it's basically a hill, but it's all defended all around, and it had views. It had 360-degree views from the top, and the Australians stormed this with which with just a couple of battalions at the time, and took the position from the Germans. It was quite an astounding feat of arms for the war. This was in early September 1918, and so there you can see some of the troops about to go into that battle.
Interesting. And
then as October 1918 came about, you saw some the Americans now moving into the attack. These are Australian troops moving forward in some of these last attacks, which they supported the American attacks, and the Americans had trouble because they attacked. This is what they call near the St. Quentin Canal, a place called Bullecourt. So it was one of the big American attacks in this area, which broke open this final German line. So they'd pulled back to their Hindenburg line again. And so these American and Australian attacks broke through there at the time. And these are Australians moving up in support of those attacks. So now I just want to deal a little bit with the artillery. So this is an Australian artillery battery operating with, this is a light artillery battery. So this is 18-pounder guns. These are the field artillery batteries. So these would fire, then they would be horse-drawn. They would move forward after the battle. But I particularly want to talk about this next man on the next photo, who was a gunner. His name was Ray Bishop. So I'm going to talk a little bit about Ray Bishop just to finish off what I'm going to talk about.
Okay.
So Ray was from Ballarat in Victoria. He was a 20-year-old guy, and he joined the 16th Field Artillery Battery. So we just showed you a picture of the type of guns he would have been operating. So he's part of 2nd Division. And so his diaries I found really interesting. He basically wrote a memoir after the war. So in his memoir, he used his diary entries, his letters, and such. So some of his writing is really tells the story on its own. So at Pozières, he said, "Day and night, earth, air, and sky trembled." And as he was Pozières, he saw an English soldier hit by a fragment of shell. And he said, it's just a young English soldier, and he was screaming. He said he was like a child. He called out for his mother. And so Ray wrote, "Poor English lad, poor mummy. I hope she'd never know." And that to me says a lot about what it was like to fight in that area.
Wow.
Then at Messines, he also fought at Messines. And at Messines, his gun battery was hit by German fire, and three of the guns were hit. And then they caught fire. And so if the ammunition catches fire, it will explode. So the men, including Ray Bishop, they just got buckets of water, throwing it over the ammunition to save it from exploding. And for that, he was awarded a military medal.
Wow.
I just want to read a little bit from his fighting at Ypres. So as you know, with artillery, they were all horse-drawn. They had no very few vehicles used on the Western Front. So it was all horsepower. So here he's talking about the animals. And he said, "We loaded at speed under the urgent pressure of drivers and restive horses," Ray Bishop wrote. "These fine animals, like men, became partly accustomed to shell fire, noise, the sight and smell of new dead, human and equine, but they liked it no more than we." So he's got a real, these are the things he's seeing. Then he came under gas attack in the same area. So talking about, this is another man talking about the gas attack. He says, "The gas has burned all my mouth and lungs, so they all swelled up." And he said, and the men went blind. They couldn't see, and it took weeks to get their sight back. So Ray Bishop, he helped carry out a stretcher case, and he could hear the shells dropping. So when a gas shell drop, it just creates like a plop. It doesn't explode. And then he could smell the faint smell of the mustard gas. But you couldn't carry a stretcher case out with a gas mask on. You just couldn't see, and you could hardly breathe. So they took them off. And of course, then he came down with gas poisoning as well. And at the casualty clearing station, he said, so he wrote of the chaotic, busy crater with the wounded in the hundreds and the doctors and the stretcher bearers and the dead men. And he says, "Other corners of hell I'd visited had not been so crowded, so dark." But he also saw a pocket of mercy and kindness with these doctors trying to treat the wounded. But for Ray Bishop, one of the saddest things was that his brother was also fighting on the front, but he was in the frontline infantry battalion, the 8th Battalion, and he hadn't heard from him for a number of weeks. So he went and found out where his brother's unit had come out of the line in the barracks, and he went to find them. And he asked for his brother Gordon, and one of the fellows just said to him, "Oh, he was killed in the 20th of September stunt." And he just said, the reply, brief, vivid, final. And then another man stood up and said, "You're his brother, aren't you?" He recognized him. And then Ray said that many years later, he found out from his sister. So his sister and another little brother were back in Australia, and they watched as a clergyman came to their house, their farmhouse, to tell them the news. So they knew one of their brothers was dead, but they didn't know which one until after the clergyman had gone and they were told. So they were trying to understand that. So I just think his story is like very typical of a lot of the men, but I think it's like a personal story.
Yeah.
And Ray actually went looking for his brother's body. They never found it. It's still listed as missing. And it's interesting. He was killed at Polygon Wood, and there's now a memorial at Polygon Wood put in by a local guy there, Johan van der Waal, who I know well. And it's a memorial it's called Brothers in Arms, and it shows a brother holding his brother. And that, it's not done for Ray Bishop's brother, but it could well have been, because he lost his brother there as well.
Yeah.
So I don't know if you ever saw that, but if you do, it's quite a memorial.
Yes. Was it last year? I was out there. I was actually out there with Rob from History in Your Hand, and that's the guy who created that memorial.
Johan,
interesting dude who like poured his life into creating that memorial.
Absolutely.
It is absolutely moving. I didn't do any filming there, but that was one of the places that we went. Rob may have done a video there. He can maybe answer in the sidebar here, but absolutely wonderful. Is his memoir published?
No. It's just a quote. It's in a war memorial. But a lot of his stories are in the book, as with a lot of the great memoirs. I mean, I only used a couple of books, referred to a couple of books. There's a couple of famous Australian soldiers who wrote books after the war. One guy called Joe Maxwell. Joe Maxwell was awarded the Victoria Cross during the war, and he's what we would call a larrikin, a real larrikin. So some of his stories are amazing. So I used some of them in the book. Another guy called Jimmy Downing. He was with the 5th Division. Also, just had these guys who survived the whole war. It's hard to believe, and there were very few who went through the whole war unscathed, who were frontline infantrymen.
Yeah.
Another guy called Harry Hartnett, same sort of thing. And though there has been a book of his memoirs, I got hold of the original manuscript, which is much vaster. So I went through that and got some great stories from that. And then there's a couple of, but most of the material in the book is from letters and diaries, unpublished memoirs, interview transcripts, which I did myself. There was a guy back in the 80s, a guy called David Chalk, who was going to write a book because his grandfather was in one of the 4th Division units. So he interviewed all these veterans who were still alive at the time about the battles at Bullecourt, and it's fascinating stuff. And so some of those had never been transcribed, or so I'd listen to them for hours and just listen to these men talk. And then, as I say, a lot of their memories are in that the chapters on Bullecourt.
Oh man!
So there's stuff in there that you wouldn't have most people wouldn't have heard before or read before. So very proud of being able to do that. As I said, I've pulled the book together. But it's been the men's. It's their stories. It's the story of the men who were there.
Yeah, and to answer a question that Lisa just put up, when will it be released in the USA? Just before we went live, Phil and I were talking about that, and it's a little bit unclear at this point. Like it was just released in Australia, and I looked it up on Amazon, and it said like May of next year, but that doesn't seem
May next year. Well, I don't know.
Is that right?
It could well be. I don't know, but as I say, the book is released in Australia, and you can also get the audio, the ebook in Australia. So I don't know whether you should be able to get. You would think you'd be able to get the ebook anyway because it's just downloadable. So
I'm not sure. When I find out for sure. Or when I get my own copy, I'll be sure to blast that out for everybody on all the different social media accounts.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah.
But yeah, I had to wait forever for Dave Holland's book, and now I got to wait on this one. It's killing me.
I can't, as I say, I know it's been sent to you probably over a month ago, but I think the US mail system at the moment might be suffering a bit like some other government departments in just efficiency.
God,
I noticed.
Right, well,
again, that stuff comes by air. It's you got this air issues over there as well. So.
Sure. All right. Well, the book is Inferno: Australians on the Western Front. I am very excited. I was excited when you told me about it, that you were working on it in Guadalcanal. Is there anything that you're looking at for the future?
Oh, at the moment, I'm going to take a break. As I say, I've just come back from PNG. I do work with the Australian Army up there, to battlefields in Papua New Guinea, and trying to learn lessons from the past in that regard. So I'm still enjoying doing that sort of work as well. So I keep myself pretty busy at the moment. I'll just take a little break from writing for a while, though.
Yeah. Well, man, I appreciate the work that you do, and I know that everybody else does as well. I think I can see in the sidebar a lot of people are pretty excited for this book.
Right.
So can't wait.
I appreciate being on catching up again, JD. I appreciate the work you do too. Just the variety of stuff you've been putting out lately. One week you're on the Civil War battlefields, and the next week you're in Holland trying to learn how to speak Dutch, and then the next week you've got stuff on the Pacific War. So hopefully we get to work together again soon, buddy. And
I would love that. I would love that. Well, hey man, thanks for jumping on this evening.
Okay. Thanks.
All right. Well, there you go.
Catch up.
That is a little bit that you can look forward to on Inferno by Phil Bradley. Again, I'm sure it's going to be great. I can't recommend this book enough. D-Day, New Guinea. If you go on Amazon, you can see all of the other works that he has available. Incredible author. I've learned so much from his work, and just a generally good guy altogether. So anyway, thanks for jumping on this evening, and have a good rest of Veterans Day or Remembrance Day for those of you who are in the U.S. Thanks.